I remember walking into the hall that evening, the warm glow of golden lights spilling across the tables, the faint scent of roses mixed with the smell of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. It should have been a perfect night. My mom's 60th birthday, a milestone, a celebration of her life, her strength, and everything she had given to us. People were laughing, glasses clinking, children running between chairs. From the outside, everything looked whole, but me, I didn't feel whole. I carried something inside me that no one else in that room knew about. Something so heavy, it sat like a stone in my chest even as I smiled and hugged relatives that I walked over to Mom, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Ma." She smiled at me with that tired but genuine warmth she's always had. Her hands were soft, but I couldn't help remembering the years they were always rough and cracked from endless work. That smile, God, it should have made me feel lighter. But instead, it made the secret inside me even louder that we all gathered around the long dining table. The silverware clinked, conversations overlapped, and for a brief second, I caught myself laughing along. But then I'd glance at my wife across the table, and we'd exchange that knowing look. That silent reminder of the $50 million sitting in our accounts. Money that came from her father. Money no one here knew about. I kept thinking, if I opened my mouth right now, if I let a single word slip, the entire energy of the night would shift. That thought haunted me. As the dinner plates were passed around, I remembered being a kid at birthdays like this. Back then, celebrations were smaller. Paper plates, homemade food, Mom stretching every dollar to make sure we had a cake. I remembered her laughing even when she was exhausted, telling me that birthdays weren't about money. They were about family, about togetherness. And I believed her. I still do. But tonight, I couldn't shake the thought that if she knew what I had, what I was hiding, maybe she'd see me differently. The irony was cruel. Here we were, celebrating my mom's 60th, her life of sacrifice, her decades of struggle, and yet, I was sitting on a fortune that could have made things easier for her. For all of us. And I said nothing. I raised my glass as everyone toasted her. The wine burned slightly as it went down, or maybe that was just the guilt choking me. Everyone cheered, shouted words of love and blessings, but all I heard in my head was silence. My silence. And that's how the night began, with laughter on the outside, but a secret gnawing at me from within. I sat there, surrounded by voices and laughter, yet completely trapped inside my own head. The table was alive, forks scraping against plates, someone telling a joke about Mom's younger years, kids giggling as they stole bites of dessert before dinner. But none of it felt real to me. I kept hearing one thing over and over again in my mind. $50 million. It wasn't just money. It was a tidal wave that had crashed into my life a few months earlier when my wife's father passed away. I still remember that day vividly. We were in the lawyer's office, sitting stiffly in those oversized leather chairs that smelled faintly of dust and old books. The air conditioner hummed too loudly, filling the silence between each word the lawyer spoke. And then, just like that, he said the number. My wife and I froze. 50 million. I remember squeezing her hand so tightly, like I needed to anchor myself to reality. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. That kind of money belonged in movies, in headlines, not in our lives. We left the office with papers in hand, our faces pale, our breaths uneven. We didn't even speak in the car ride home, just stared out opposite windows, trying to process what had just happened. Now, months later, here I was, sitting at my mom's birthday dinner, while the weight of that number pressed down on me like a storm cloud no one else could see. Every clink of silverware, every burst of laughter, just reminded me of how out of place I felt with this secret. My wife caught my eye across the table. She gave me the smallest nod, the kind that said, "Remember, stay quiet." Not here. It was the same conversation we'd had at home, over and over again. She thought telling my family would open the door to chaos, jealousy, expectations, endless questions. And maybe she was right. But sitting there, watching my mom laugh with my siblings, I felt the words rise in my throat like they were clawing to get out. I thought about how different things could be. My mom, who spent her entire life working double shifts, who skipped meals so we could eat, who patched up our torn clothes instead of buying new ones. I could change everything for her. Right here, right now. But then I looked around the table. The way my brother bragged about his new promotion. The way my aunt kept making passive comments about money and who had really made it in life. The way my cousins compared vacations and cars like it was some competition. Suddenly, I saw it so clearly. If I said a word, the whole night would fracture. It wouldn't be about my mom anymore. It would be about me. About US. Oh, I swallowed it down. The secret, the fortune, the guilt. I smiled, nodded at the conversation, and let the laughter drown out the storm in my chest. The thing about secrets is they don't just sit quietly inside you. They scratch. They whisper. They remind you of every reason you should say something and every reason you shouldn't. That night, sitting at my mom's 60th birthday table, I kept asking myself the same question: why am I staying silent? On the surface, it was simple. My wife and I had agreed. But underneath, there were years, decades, really, of family history that had already taught me how dangerous money could be. I remembered being 12, sitting on the staircase while my parents argued in the kitchen. The smell of burnt rice still hung in the air because Mom had left the stove on during the fight. I couldn't see them, but I heard every word. They weren't yelling about love or respect or trust. They were yelling about bills, about the rent check that had bounced, about who spent too much at the grocery store. I remember Mom's voice cracking when she said, "I'm doing everything I can," and Dad snapping back, "Well, it's never enough, is it?" That moment tattooed itself on my memory. Money was never neutral in our house. It was sharp, like glass. It cut people. It divided them. Years later, when I got my first job, I saw the same pattern ripple through my extended family. Cousins fighting over inheritances. Uncles holding grudges over loans that were never repaid. Holidays ruined because someone brought up who owed who. I watched people I loved transform into strangers the second money came up. When my wife and I sat in our kitchen weeks before Mom's birthday, arguing about whether to tell my family, I wasn't just hearing her words. I was hearing all those echoes from the past. She told me, "Your family won't see it as a blessing. They'll see it as an opportunity. Or worse, a weapon." And as much as I hated to admit it, she was probably right. Still, knowing all that didn't make the guilt any lighter. Sitting at that table, looking at my mom, I thought about the years she carried us on her back. The nights she worked the graveyard shift and then came home to pack our lunches. The way she always found a way to stretch nothing into something. I wanted to tell her, "You don't have to worry anymore, Mom. I've got you now. I can take care of you." But another voice inside me hissed, "And then what? What happens after that confession? Do my siblings suddenly resent me? Do they start treating me differently? Does every family gathering become about what I'm willing to give or not give?" The truth was, I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk breaking whatever fragile peace my family had, even if that peace was built on a lie. I kept my mouth shut, smiled when I needed to smile, laughed when I needed to laugh. And all the while, the secret sat heavy in my chest, reminding me exactly why silence sometimes feels safer than honesty. There was this moment, small, almost ordinary, that hit me harder than anything else that night. Mom was sitting at the head of the table, the glow of the candles flickering across her face. Someone had just cracked a joke about how she still looked like she was in her 40s, and she laughed so hard her shoulders shook. That laugh, it wasn't polite, it wasn't forced. It was pure. And then she smiled. Wide, unguarded, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. Maybe decades. Her eyes wrinkled at the corners, her cheeks lifted high, and for a second, she looked free. And that's when the guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. Because while she was smiling, all I could think about was how much she deserved more. How she deserved not to worry about medical bills, or the rising price of groceries, or whether her car was going to survive another winter. How she had given everything to us, and here I was, sitting on $50 million, pretending like my life was still the same. It's funny. When you look at someone you love, someone who raised you, you start to wonder if they can see through you. Every time Mom's eyes landed on me that night, it was like she could peel back the layers and sense the storm inside. She didn't say anything, of course, but I couldn't shake the thought. Does she know? Can she tell? When the cake came out, 60, candles glowing in the dim light, the entire room sang. Off-key, messy, joyful. I stood behind her, clapping along, but my throat was tight. I watched her close her eyes to make a wish, and I felt my chest ache. What was she wishing for? More years? More peace? something she thought she'd never have. I wanted so badly to reach out, to say, "Mom, whatever you just wished for, I can make it happen." But I didn't. I just stood there, silent, as she blew out the candles. The smoke curled upward, faint and ghostly, and I couldn't shake the thought that I was letting her down in the quietest, cruelest way possible. After the singing, she turned to me, her eyes soft, and whispered, "Thank you for coming, sweetheart. That's all I need." And maybe she meant it. Maybe she really believed that my presence, my love, was enough. But standing there, my hands shaking slightly around my glass, I didn't believe it. Not fully, because I knew the truth. I knew I could give her so much more, and instead, I was giving her nothing but silence. That smile stayed with me long after the party ended. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it reminded me of how much I was holding back from the person who deserved it most. That it's strange how memory works. One second, I was in that brightly lit banquet hall, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, and the next, I was 12 again, standing in our tiny kitchen, watching my mom try to stretch a single can of beans into dinner for four. The smell of fried onions still clung to my imagination. That cheap oil sizzling on the pan as Mom stirred with one hand and held the overdue bill in the other. Her face was tired, the kind of tired makeup couldn't hide, though she never wore much anyway. I remember how she tried to make it all feel normal, humming softly under her breath, telling me it was just enough food. And I believed her. Kids don't know what empty feels like until later. Back at the birthday dinner, I stabbed at my plate, but I wasn't tasting anything. Every bite just pulled me deeper into those flashbacks that I remembered the winters when the heater barely worked. We'd all sleep in the living room, huddled under blankets like campers, pretending it was fun. Mom would joke about it. Look at us, camping indoors. But I could hear her coughing at night, could feel the way she tucked the covers tighter around us kids while she shivered quietly. And then there was the time she came home with holes in her shoes. I must have been 15. She brushed it off, said, "They're comfortable this way." But I saw her feet through the worn soles. I saw her knuckles raw from scrubbing floors at her second job. That image burned itself into me. It still makes my chest tighten. Sitting there at her 60th birthday, those memories played in my head like cruel home movies. And I couldn't stop thinking about the absurdity of it all. How this woman, who had given everything, who had suffered and struggled and sacrificed, was still living modestly, carefully, while I sat on more wealth than I knew what to do with. And yet, I said nothing. That I glanced at her across the table, laughing at something one of my siblings said. She looked so alive, so happy, so light. And maybe that was the part that broke me most. Because in her eyes, she didn't need saving. She didn't see herself as the woman with holes in her shoes or the one who skipped dinner so her kids could eat. She just saw herself as Mom. And maybe, for her, that was enough. But, for me, it wasn't. The guilt pressed down harder, curling in my stomach, making every laugh around me sound just a little too loud, every clink of glass just a little too sharp. That I wanted to fix it. I wanted to take away every scar those years had left on her. But instead, I sat there, silent, replaying the struggles that had built me, and realizing how much my silence was starting to feel like betrayal. The party had settled into that warm middle stretch, people full from dinner, conversations overlapping, kids getting restless. I was halfway lost in my own thoughts when I felt it. My wife's hand brushing against mine under the table. That it wasn't affectionate. It was deliberate. A signal. I turned my head slightly, and she leaned closer, her perfume cutting through the smell of wine and roasted chicken. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Don't even think about it." Her voice was calm, almost tender, but the meaning was sharp. She knew me too well. She knew that all night, I'd been teetering on the edge of saying something. I swallowed hard, nodded faintly, and forced my gaze back to the table. But inside, my chest tightened like a fist. Because she wasn't wrong, I had been thinking about it. Every laugh from my mom, every glimpse of her smile, every memory flashing through. My head made me want to stand up, clink my glass, and just tell the truth. My wife kept her hand resting lightly against mine, like an anchor. To anyone else, it probably looked sweet. But to me, it was a reminder of all our late-night arguments leading up to this day that I could still hear her voice from. One of those nights, sharp and trembling as we sat in the living room surrounded by unopened letters from the lawyer. Do you realize what will happen if we tell them? Your family will never look at us the same again. They'll expect. They'll resent. They'll twist it until you're the villain for having more than they do. I had yelled back, louder than I meant to. She's my mother. Don't you think she deserves to know? And then the silence that followed. The kind of silence that doesn't end with resolution, but with exhaustion. Now, in the middle of that party, her whisper echoed all of it. And I felt trapped. Trapped between loyalty to my wife and loyalty to my mother. Between silence and confession. Between peace and chaos that I glanced at my mom again, her eyes bright as she chatted with one of my aunts. She looked happy, so happy. It made my throat ache. And yet, I couldn't tell if that happiness was proof that my silence was the right choice or evidence that I was robbing her of something she deserved. My wife gave my hand a small squeeze, then pulled away, returning to her plate as though nothing had happened. But her message lingered, heavy as stone, stay quiet. Not tonight. I picked up my glass of water, the cool condensation sliding down my fingers, and I thought, maybe she's right. Maybe this isn't the moment. Maybe there will never be a moment. And with that thought, I let the silence swallow me again. After the toast, after the laughter had softened into chatter, I felt it. A pull, almost magnetic, urging me to stand up. I could almost see it in my mind, as though the room had frozen around me. Me, holding my glass high, every eye in the room turning toward me, every smile halting mid-laugh, waiting for the words I was about to say. Mom, there's something you need to know. Something about the future we can give you. I imagined her face. Shock first, maybe confusion, then disbelief, and finally that quiet, soft gratitude I longed to see in her eyes. I imagined my siblings stiffening, my cousins whispering, my aunts and uncles holding their breath, and my wife sitting there, her hand gripping mine tightly, her jaw clenched, warning me with her eyes. It was intoxicating. That moment of revelation, that moment where I could undo years of sacrifice and give her everything she'd ever deserved, without strings, without expectation, without a single hesitation. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and I felt my hands shake slightly around my glass. But then, reality came rushing back, as cruel as a slap. That I remembered the patterns, the history, the fights over money, the jealousy, the passive-aggressive comments that had haunted family gatherings for years. I remembered my wife's face during our conversations, her warning, her fear, her insistence that this was a storm we weren't ready to face. That I took a breath, trying to anchor myself. I could almost hear her whisper again, not tonight. Stay quiet. Protect the peace. And I knew she was right. I knew that revealing the truth, even to someone I loved more than anything, could change everything, could shatter this night, this fragile warmth that my mom was basking in. But that didn't stop the temptation from clawing at me. I felt it in the rise and fall of my heartbeat, in the flush of my ears, in the sweat forming at my temples. I imagined standing there, the room quieting around me, my mom's eyes widening as the weight of my secret finally reached her. For a second, just a fleeting second, I almost stood. I almost let the truth escape, and then I swallowed it. Hard. I forced my hands to my sides, let the glass rest on the table, and smiled at the next joke someone told. I laughed when laughter was expected, nodded when nodding was expected. The storm in my chest didn't disappear. It just settled, simmering, quietly, as though marking its territory. That's the thing about temptation. Even when you resist it, it leaves a mark. Even when you hold your tongue, it makes your lips heavy, your thoughts louder, your guilt sharper. And sitting there, watching my mom laugh, I realized that the temptation wasn't just about the money. It was about what I wanted to do versus what I had to do. And that night, I chose silence. The party ended with all the subtle goodbyes, hugs, and lingering laughter that felt too loud now that the night was winding down. My mom hugged me tightly, whispering her thanks again, her hair smelling faintly of jasmine and cake frosting. I nodded, smiling. But the moment passed over me like a cold wind I couldn't shake. I in the car. The world outside was blurred by rain-specked windows and the warm glow of streetlights. My wife drove in silence, her hands tight on the wheel, her jaw set in that familiar way I had come to recognize as both patience and warning. I looked at her once, and she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, like she was saying, "We survived. The night. That's what matters." The silence between us was thick, the kind that presses into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I wanted to speak, wanted to confess, wanted to finally release the words that had been clawing at my throat all evening. But the fear, the weight of what could happen if I did, held me back. That I stared out the window and watched reflections stretch and twist in the puddles on the asphalt. Each ripple seemed to echo the tumult inside me. The guilt, the longing, the shame, the love, all mixed together into a knot I couldn't untangle. That I thought about my mom, sitting there tonight, so full of light, completely unaware of the fortune we had inherited. The thought made my chest tighten. Could she ever forgive me if she knew I had kept it from her? Or worse, would she resent me, thinking I had turned her joy into a performance, a lie to preserve my own comfort? My wife reached over and brushed my hand lightly. The touch was grounding, but it also reminded me of the pact we had made, the unspoken agreement to protect each other, protect this secret, and protect our families from the chaos it could bring. I nodded again, squeezing her hand in return, but it felt hollow, like an anchor I couldn't quite hold on to. I thought about the night in flashes, Mom's smile, the candles, the laughter, the whispered warning. Every detail replayed in my mind, each memory sharp and colored with regret. I realized how fragile these moments were, how easily they could be shattered by a single truth spoken aloud. And yet, in the quiet, I also felt a strange relief. Silence, for all its weight, gave me control. I could navigate this carefully. I could protect my mother's joy tonight, and maybe, someday, I could figure out the right way to tell her everything. The car engine hummed along the empty streets, and I let my mind drift between memories and possibilities. I knew I was living two lives simultaneously, the one everyone saw, where I was a son celebrating his mother, and the one no one knew, where I carried a secret that could change everything. By the time we pulled into our driveway, the tension had settled into a heavy ache. My wife glanced at me once more, and I returned a small, weary smile. No words were needed. We both knew. And yet, the silence lingered, a quiet reminder of the night's choices, and of the storm still waiting quietly in the wings. The night after my mom's birthday, the house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the warmth of the party, all of it had vanished, leaving only the echo of what I hadn't said. I sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house filling the silence. The secret pressed down on me like a living thing, twisting in my chest, demanding attention. That I thought about what it meant to carry this weight. $50 million. More money than I had ever imagined, sitting in an account that no one else could touch. And yet, here I was, unable to give my mother even a fraction of it without triggering chaos, resentment, or misunderstanding. It was a cruel kind of prison, the freedom to do anything, paired with the inability to act. That I closed my eyes and saw her face again. My mother, radiant and laughing, completely unaware of the fortune we had inherited. That image should have brought me joy, but it brought something heavier, guilt. The kind that settles deep in your bones and refuses to let go. I thought about the future, too. What if she discovered the truth years from now? What if she realized that her son had kept something so enormous from her, even if it was for her own good? Would she forgive me? Could I even forgive myself? And what of my wife? The unspoken agreement between us had kept the secret alive, but at what cost? We were walking a fine line between protection and deception, and every day it grew thinner. I imagined scenarios in my head, the perfect moment to tell her, the right words that could make it okay. But no matter how I framed it, the fear was always there. Fear of jealousy, of anger, of shattered family dynamics. Fear that the moment we revealed the truth, everything would turn upside down. And yet, there was another layer to this weight. A strange, almost guilty sense of power. For the first time in my life, I had control over something so monumental, so potentially life-changing, that it scared me. It wasn't a power I wanted, but it was one I couldn't ignore. I could protect, or I could destroy, depending on how and when I chose to act. And that responsibility, more than the money itself, was the heaviest burden of all. That I thought about my mother's sacrifices, the decades she spent giving everything to make our lives better. She had taught me about resilience, about love, about generosity, without ever asking for much in return. And yet here I was, holding a fortune that could repay her in ways I never could with words or gestures. And still silence. The night stretched long and quiet, and I sat in that room with only the soft hum of the house around me. The weight of what's hidden pressed against every thought, every memory, every plan for the future. It's not just a secret. It's a responsibility, a moral tightrope, and a source of endless doubt. And as I finally closed my eyes, exhausted and restless, I realized something. No matter what I chose, no matter how careful I was, this secret would shape every moment of our lives from now on. Every smile, every hug, every celebration would carry it with it, quietly, invisibly, like a shadow I could never shake. I keep coming back to her smile that night. That soft, radiant, unguarded smile of my mother's, glowing in the candlelight as if nothing in the world could touch her. I keep thinking about how she deserved to know, to have everything we had, to be cared for in ways that no words or gestures could fully express. And yet, I stayed silent, driving home from the party, lying awake later in bed, and replaying every moment in my mind. I realized that silence wasn't born of selfishness. It was born of protection. Protection for my mother, for my wife, for the fragile harmony of a family that had weathered enough storms already. I didn't want to taint her joy, to replace her laughter with questions or tension. I wanted her to feel whole, even if I carried the weight of the truth alone. And still, the guilt lingers. I know I've built walls around her, around myself, around everyone I love. Every time I see her, I wonder if she suspects the truth, if she senses the enormity of what I'm hiding. Sometimes, I catch myself imagining what it would feel like to tell her, her hands reaching for mine, the shock in her eyes, the tears, the disbelief. But then I imagine the fallout, the subtle resentment, the comparisons, the shift in how everyone sees me. And I swallow those words down again, hard, like bitter medicine. Yet in that silence, there is a strange kind of reverence. My mother has given so much, years of labor, endless sacrifices, love without condition. She built a family on her shoulders, and I can only try to honor that by protecting the peace she still cherishes. The money, the inheritance, all of it feels almost secondary compared to the legacy she's already given me. Resilience, kindness, and the knowledge that love doesn't need a price tag, that I look back at that birthday now and understand something I couldn't in the moment. My mother's happiness that night wasn't dependent on wealth. It wasn't about gifts or surprises or what we could give her. It was about presence. It was about love, care, and shared moments. The laughter, the candles, the clinking glasses, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at her family. I can give her the world later. Someday, maybe, I'll find a way to honor her sacrifices without the shadows of guilt or expectation hanging over us. But for now, I let her joy be untouched. I let her smile remain unburdened by anything I could offer. I stayed silent, yes, but it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because, for once, I wanted her to feel the fullness of a life she has earned simply by being herself. And in that decision, however heavy it feels, I find a quiet kind of peace. She deserves more than money. She deserves love, respect, and the freedom to just be. And if keeping this secret allows her to have that, even for a night, a year, or even a decade, it's worth every pang of guilt I feel. Her life has been a gift to me. And if I can preserve even a fraction of her joy by protecting the secret I hold, then maybe, in some way, I am giving back everything she ever gave me.